Babangon tayo. Kape nga.
Okay na, ladies. Hello, Q Sensei. Finally, you're in. Q Sensei, are you okay with the audio? Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It seems like we still have a technical problem. Q Sensei, we can't hear you. Pwede niyo bang i-unmute si Q Sensei? Can't hear you po.
pwedeng ma-access yung COVID Japan, on Japan daw po, na video na sabi ni Ma'am.
Nasa pinakadulo ng slide. Wala kang bagong slide.
Meron po, meron po.
Yung pinakadulo,
Hello, everyone. We are still trying to get Chiho Sensei in. So while waiting for Chiho Sensei to get connected to our Zoom, Dr. Zayas would like to show her video, which is part of her presentation. It's a video on COVID in Japan. Thank you.
can I say something? This slide, this presentation, can you hear me? This presentation should be just suggested to you, but since we are just waiting for some developments with our technical problem, I want you to watch this interesting study, art history of epidemic and Japanese response to it. Okay, let's go.
Yes.
Hello and welcome to Japanology Plus. I'm Peter Barakan. This painting is by Hokusai, arguably Japan's best-known artist through history, although most people know him for his woodblock prints. This is actually a replica. The original was lost in a fire almost 100 years ago, but thanks to the existence of a black and white photograph, it was able to be recreated. The painting depicts a legendary deity, Susanoo no Mikoto, who is subduing a group of spirits who bring about all kinds of disasters, including epidemics. There are 15 of these spirits of disease in total, and they make a very good argument for physical distancing. We don't know what they all represent, but one expert thinks that this guy with the white bag around his neck represents influenza. And this one here with the red hood, smallpox. On today's program, we're going to take a look at how Japan has dealt with epidemics since ancient times through the lens of cultural artifacts like this and other events. I'm going to be talking to Ms. Satomi Yamamoto, who's an art historian specializing in the study of illness and death. Thank you very much for joining us. Excuse me if I don't shake your hand. May I ask you, how do you go about your research? What do you use? I'm kind of anxious to ask.
Okay.
Well, let me answer in Japanese.
もちろん OK。はい。
I study art history with a particular focus on Buddhist art. Buddhism reveals knowledge about Japan's history and traditions, as well as its people. It often gives surprising insights into how they lived, and that's what I look for in my research. Today, we'll consider paintings and Buddhist images to discover how Japanese in days gone by dealt with epidemics.
Since ancient times, Japan has been influenced by China, Korea, and other parts of Asia. Buddhism arrived in the early 6th century, and from the 7th century, Japan dispatched missions to learn about continental technology and culture. But the new things that arrived in Japan weren't always good. Disease, for example. A smallpox epidemic in the 8th century killed a third of the Japanese population, throwing society into chaos. Smallpox and other diseases struck again and again in the centuries that followed.
Even now, when we get a pandemic like we have now that people haven't seen before, people are frightened by it, which is, of course, only natural. Back in the 7th century, when people didn't have any medical knowledge, it had to be even more frightening. Do we have any idea how people of that period perceived illness or epidemics?
Back then, they had no concept of what a virus was. Japanese at the time thought illness was caused by evil spirits or curses, or perhaps disease was a divine punishment for the failures of the ruling classes. That's how they thought of it. People saw illness as justice for misdeeds in this or a previous life. They'd say you did something wrong, and that's why you're ill, or that's why there's an outbreak.
Were they actually able to deal with sickness in any efficient way?
They prayed. People thought that if they atoned for their sins, they would be able to avoid catching a disease. Or alternatively, even if they did catch something, they'd make a speedy recovery. Prayer was seen as very important indeed. After the 8th century smallpox outbreak, the Shomu Emperor, who ruled at that time, moved the capital city 4 times in 5 years.
Sorry, we had to cut the video. Finally, welcome to Professor Chiho Ogaya. She could
I'm so
already
sorry.
No worries, Sensei. Okay, today is December 10, Human Rights Day. Welcome to the UPCIS webinar to commemorate this day with lectures from 2 of our esteemed colleagues. This webinar is also in solidarity with the ongoing academic strike led by UP students and faculty. We thank our students who find time to join us this afternoon. Okay, let me just introduce quickly our 2 lecturers. Professor Chiho Ogaya is UPCIS visiting professor from the Faculty of Letters of Farish University in Yokohama, Japan. She's a sociologist with research interest in transnational movement, migration, and gender studies. Her lecture title is COVID-19 and the Marginalized People in Japan. It will focus on migrant workers and issues faced by women in Japan during the pandemic. Professor Cynthia Neri Zayas is UPCIS former director, currently professorial lecturer. She received her doctoral degree in cultural anthropology from the University of Tsukuba, Japan. Her research interests include maritime anthropology in Asia and the Pacific and cultures of disaster. Her presentation is a response to the cultural responses to COVID-19 by the Missionaries of Jesus and the Taga-Kaulo of Malita, Davao. Okay, so may we request you, Sensei, to give our lecture?
Okay, magandang hapon po sa inyo lahat. Good afternoon po everybody. I'm so sorry about being very late because of some technical problems that I don't know why it happened until now. Anyway, luckily I could enter this Zoom room, so I feel so happy that I feel so blessed right now. So sorry thank you for waiting for me for a long time. So first of all, Ma'am Gina and the CIS people, especially the Ma'am Sarah and Ma'am Sim, for making that such a beautiful opportunity for me to be able to talk to your friends of CIS on the special day of the International Human Rights Day. So then I hope that everybody in the Philippines, especially, are safe and regardless the disasters, several disasters, as well as the COVID-19. Of course, Japan is also being affected by COVID-19, but the situation might be quite different in some points between the Philippines and Japan. So today, let me share my, yes. Okay. So today, maybe less than 30 minutes, I will briefly share with you about the situation of the so-called marginalized people in Japan under the COVID-19 pandemic situation here in Japan. So basically, mainly, I focus on the two group of the people. One is foreign workers, especially TITP, Technical Internship Training Program workers, and the Japanese, and as well as the migrant women, especially in the non-regular, with non-regular, status as employee. So first, let me introduce you a kind of weird news which was spread in Japan the end of October. So it was a case of the arrest of Vietnamese. Actually, at the beginning, we didn't know that who are they. But the 4 Vietnamese were arrested because, according to the report, they stole the fresh pig and some chickens. Then they slaughtered those animals in their apartments in Gunma Prefecture. So it was quite weird news for us, and then as well the shocking news, like because here in Japan, I don't know in the Philippines, but here in Japan, we need a special permission, a special license to slaughter the animals for eating purposes. Then it's very weird also that this kind of thing is happen in the residential area, especially in the apartment. Then those 4 Vietnamese were arrested because of that, their activities. Then police found out that they are ex-TITP, Technical Intern Training Program in workers from the Vietnams. So if you are not familiar with the TITP, so please briefly let me explain. So TITP means a Technical Intern Training Program. It's a Gino Jishusei in Nihongo. So they are officially, they're entering Japan to learn the skills and in Japan, then they bring those skills to their hometown. In other words, the purpose of this program is so-called international cooperation and skills transfer. However, in reality, as most of the Japanese people already knew, but those TITP workers are demanded in the sectors such as agriculture, construction, manufacturing, food processing, and fishery sector, which are all suffering from lack of manpower. A lot of young and healthy Japanese people do not want to work in that kind of sector because it's very hard, less paid, and it's very severe working condition. That's why a lot of small-scale companies or farmers really demand that those TITP workers as low-paid, unskilled labor, not as intern, as it is said in the official program. So, but still, the government recognize those TITP interns as interns, not the formal workers. No, but in reality, a lot of people already know that they are really, the following the, labor shortage of Japanese industrial sector as well as agriculture and fishery sectors. Then the reality of the TITP workers, they are really, in a sense, trafficked people. So they are debt bonded. So it means that they have to pay a lot of money before coming to Japan. Then after they come to Japan, they start to work as TITP interns. So they pay back of their debt. So it means that they are really debt bonded workers. So then in their workforce in Japan, usually they are lack of information. Then they're really controlled by the employer. That they're not only working hours as well as not only working hours, but their everyday lives are always controlled and monitored by the employers. And they're paid very, very few, very, very small. They are always, lack of freedom of movement, something like that. So this TITP program is criticized as trafficking, from the different countries outside of Japan. I mean, so even from the Philippines, TITP interns are coming to Japan, but recently the Vietnamese is number one countries of origin of TITP workers. So then until now, the government recognized this TITP is an intern, not the former workers. But in reality, TITP workers consist 20% of foreign labor in Japan. So actually, those Vietnamese who were arrested because of the slaughter of the pig in their apartment, so they, according to the report, they lost their jobs due to the COVID-19. And some of them also ran away from their workplace, even during their contract as TITP workers, due to their severe working condition, as I explained a little bit earlier. Yeah. So because of that, after the this arrest case was reported, a lot of people found out that how those TITP workers become very, the vulnerable, situation, under the COVID-19. Of course, most of the people are really affected by the COVID-19, but they really severely affected because of this situation, pandemic situation. So there is another case of the TITP workers that, yeah, it sounds very, miserable for me, but one Vietnamese also were just left in the Tokyo station without any help, without any guidance, without any, money. So they were just, left. He was just left by their employer as well as their dispatching company because the employer really didn't want to continue to hire him. So he was just left alone in the very big station in Tokyo. Then he became a little bit homeless after that. Then finally, some NGO people found him, then they sheltered him. So this kind of things has happened here in Japan. So of course, at the same time, some TITP workers who finished their contract fully couldn't go home because of the cancellation of a lot of international flights. So then, of course, the TITP visa control system is quite strict. So if they finish the contracts, they cannot stay in the workplace, then their visa is also expired. So then they become automatically overstayed. So those people are, in a sense, stranded in Japan. Then yeah, that's a worst case of the, in a sense, victims of the COVID-19, I think. Then usually those TITP workers are not much good at speaking English, at speaking Japanese, as well as reading Japanese. So they are really, what do you call this? They are really like a lost child, in the big city area, especially, Yeah, so this is a one group of the, in a sense, marginalized sector or a victimized sector under the COVID-19. So the second group that I want to show you or share with you about the impact of COVID-19 in Japan is women workers. So this graph is comparison of number of suicide cases in Japan by gender. The blue line is a man and the red line is a woman. Then this one, the light blue is in 2019, no? Men. And the strong blue, deep blue line is the suicide case numbers of men in 2020. The red one, the light red, almost orange one, is the female suicide cases in 2019. Then deep or dark orange line is 2020 women's suicide case until last October. So it clearly shows us, of course, the total number of the suicide cases are still more men. We can find more men in the numbers, but the increasing tendency is much bigger in women's case in 2020 after the COVID-19. No? So the number says that the women's suicide cases increased 82.6% if you compare with the last year, 1 year ago. No? But the men's case, of course, it's also increased, but it's 21.3% increase. So it shows us that women's suicide cases are dramatically increased in Japan after COVID-19 has happened, especially since after June or July of 2020. It is quite shocking data that was reported very recently. So one of the reasons why the women's, of course, there's a lot of reasons why the increase of the suicide case of the women, but one of the reasons is the working labor situation of the women workers, I think. So this is a graph as of 2019. It's a comparison by gender. So the left one is a female workforce in Japan. It's a percentage. Then blue one is non-regular workers, and the black one is a regular workers. So obviously, the 60% of female workforce in Japan is non-regular worker. Then 80% of black one, not 80% of male workforce is regular. I mean, that's a full-time worker. So more than half of majority of the women workers here in Japan are working as non-regular workers. Then when the COVID-19 has happened, and we had, what do you call this, emergency, state of emergency call from the national government. Then, of course, all of the HEUs have to follow the ordinance. Then there are a lot of unemployment issues have happened, but especially the women are really affected by this economic, the situation. So like I showed you, the female non-regular workers are majority among the women, and they are especially working in the personal service sector, the shoppers, waitress, attendants. I think it's similar in the Philippines. Then those sectors are most affected by the COVID-19 issues. Like we have to keep the social distances, or we can't do the group eating, or some social exchange, or really not prohibited, but what do you call this, discouraged to do so. So a lot of shops and restaurants, departments, and hotels are really closed. So then, of course, as a sector, it was really affected by the business suspension request. However, at the same time, the female non-regular workers in that sectors were the first group to be fired. When you say that the female non-regular workers, of course, it includes a lot of the migrant women. Non-Japanese women are also included in this sector, like hotel, bed making sectors, or restaurants, or shoppers, or any other, personal service sectors. No? That's why in terms of the employment perspective, the women are more affected by the men. So then I suppose that that is one of the reasons why the suicide case of the women has increased very recently. Then it sounds a little bit general, but in terms of the women's situation, we also have to pay attention on the intimate sphere or skin and the COVID-19 relationship. So among the non-regular female workers, there are a lot of the single mothers, right? And then single mothers poverty is one of the big issues which now Japanese society has to really face and tackle on. So the single mothers had to have multiple burden under the COVID-19. Of course, the financial difficulties as single parent, but at the same time, so they have to have more and more care burden for their children. So it's different from the Philippines. The Japanese single mother usually without social networks, without family support, then they are, not all cases, but most of the cases, they are really socially isolated in many cases. So under the pandemic situation, those single moms burdens are really piles up. Then they have to bear with the multiple burden in their home. Then in terms of the homes, since around March, we are under a kind of campaign which is called Stay Home, or Uchinimasho, stay home campaigns. Then, of course, for some people, staying home might be, a kind of, what do you call this, safety, or a kind of, what do you call this, safety from the outside world. That's why staying home will protect yourself, protect your family. So that's a discourse under the Stay Home campaign in Japan. But I think it's a similar, in the Philippines or any other countries. But the Stay Home campaigns have brought the increase of the different types of domestic violence. It also happened between the couples, but also happened between the father and daughters, not only sexual or physical, violence, but the verbal one, or some, psychological, violence against women and girls. So it is also one of the reasons why the increase of the suicide case of the women, according to the study group of the women's issues under the COVID-19. So then, of course, we have to admit that there is an illusion of work-life balance and gender equality in Japan. So under the COVID-19, since last March to May, I think almost 2 to 3 months, all schools from elementary school to high school, school was suspended under the national ordinance. No? So there, a lot of my friends, where the small kids, are really screamed at the, wow, I have to really take care of my kids all day, because they don't need to go to, they cannot go to the school, so they're staying at home for holidays. So how can I manage it? So my, mother friends really, screamed, almost really screaming out, at that time. So it meant that here in Japan, a lot, of course, people trying to say that we have to make it realize that the work-life balance and gender equality even in the household, but reality is not. So when the school is suspended, then the children have to stay at home. So the mothers are the main carer for the children. So then some of the mothers have their own work, but they have to maintain the balance. But it's a very, very big burden for those who have to take care of their children because of these school suspensions. So this kind of different, what about this? Not responsibility, but burdens in a sense are really strongly affected women's in Japan. Then I think these are the several reasons why the cases of the suicide of the women in Japan had dramatically increased after October or November or something like that, so. Then I showed you very briefly, I showed the two group people cases, like TITP workers who lost their work and they have to, survive to, slaughter the pig and sell their meat through the internet to make their own money, And the women, Japanese women who are underemployed because of the COVID-19, as well as who had to have more and more care burden because of that. So those are, I think those groups' situations are quite symbolic under the pandemic situation. But we have to admit that the COVID-19 or pandemic didn't create the new marginalization or new issues, I think. So from my point of view, it has just made those marginalized people more visible in more serious way. So like any other disasters, the pandemic has revealed the reality of exploitation, human rights violation, and lack of protection, which had already existed. So of course, there are a lot of new problems and new marginalization under the COVID-19, but at the same time, the COVID-19 really showed us strongly that the real faces or real pictures of our society, in a sense. But those two issues which I raised today, like migrant workers issues and the women's issues, Japanese society, Japanese society started to respond, toward those issues. So they cannot ignore those issues. No. Then one example is the civil society's action for the stranded migrant workers as well as asylum seekers. So one fund initiated by the one quite big, the NGO working for the migrant workers here in Japan was created, and they could solicit 28 million yen, Japanese yen per month. It's a quite good amount of money to financially support those people who lost their job or who couldn't get any public support from the government, or those who have to find shelter for their families. So it is a very quick initiative by the civil society, but I think it's quite successful, in a sense. Then for the women, the late recently in October, so Japanese government has just organized a special committee for studying the effects of COVID-19 on women. So some feminist groups criticize it's too late to start, but I think in a sense it's a official initiative for focusing on the women's issues. So here in Japan, so I think it's a good step for the government to really think about the marginalized sector in Japan. Then luckily, recently the media is focusing on those issues too. So NHK reported about this arrested Vietnamese cases. Then through these cases, we could find out that how TITP workers lost their jobs, got stranded, and exploited, even before the COVID-19. So I think Ma'am Chim will talk about the cultural response toward the pandemic, but I hope even in the very, very, unpredictable situation of the pandemic, helps our society or civil society as well as the cultural, the culture can do something that we can go beyond, these difficult situations, I think. So that is the end of my presentation po. So maraming salamat po. So happy International Human Rights Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chiyo Sensei, for sharing to us the reality faced by foreign workers in Japan and the women in Japan, and hearing the government's response by providing funds and even conducting a study on the effect of COVID-19. I wish the same for our government also. Without further ado, if Professor Zayas is ready, I'm Chim, can we listen to your presentation?
Thank you, Chiho Sensei. Thank you for giving voices to women who are no longer here on earth about what had happened to them due to neglect, perhaps from institutions in your country. Okay, Alex, can I request for the video, my slides, please? Or maybe I can share the screen. Is it possible? Here goes. This is my screen, right? Okay, now, a while ago, while we were waiting for some while we were fixing some technical problem, we were showing this Japanese response to pandemic. Well, we began with the ancient times, but if you wish to see it, this is the link and you can continue. We don't have enough time now, but let me now go back to this is my reaction to the interesting presentation of the Missionary of Jesus, Father Evangelista, and Miss Gonzalo, Tagacolo of Malita, Davao. So hopefully I will not consume 30 minutes, but this presentation I chose precisely because it gave us an idea of what is happening in indigenous people's communities during this COVID-19 pandemic. So I will talk about, basically, it is not my talk, it's the talk of Father Evangelista and Miss Gonzalo, but let me just give you the context of this presentation. Now, the Missionary of Jesus is more than 30 years old in the Philippines. It's a Spanish congregation, and they established a mission in Malita, in Davao. Well, they have an IP school, which is very interesting, and I am interested about its workings and how they're doing something about it. And I want to show you where it is. No, it's here in Davao del Sur, over here. No, okay. Now, I want I I want to show you a 30-minute video YouTube, which I am sharing with the agreement of Father Evangelista. And thank you, Father, for letting us use this. And it's just unfortunate that I am unable to ask earlier, but thank you for giving us the go to show this. Now I want to show this to you, and please watch it because it will be this facing the pandemic as Tagakaulo. This is the title, the cultural approach and community adaptability. So it gives us a glimpse on how outsider, that's the MJ, the Missionaries of Jesus, and the community itself is responding to this kind of a situation. So can we have the video on, or shall I click it? Will you do it, Alexis?
Madyaw na adlaw sa kaday. Good day to everyone. COVID-19 has changed the way of life of the
Are
entire
you
world.
seeing it?
The outbreak of the virus SARS-CoV-2 began in Wuhan, China in 2019 and reached our shores early this year. Like many nations, the Philippines has been doing what it could to help protect its citizens. It created an interagency task force to help the country deal with the pandemic. Aside from following the general health protocols crafted by that agency, indigenous communities are complementing this with other ways that make use of the richness of their culture. Here are some things that the Malita Tagakolo mission has been doing. First, the Tagakolo COVID-19 module. Second, the modular classes for the IP schools. Third, the ritual of Pag-inalad or Paglimot. And fourth, the Indigenous Peoples Sunday celebrations.
The Tagakolo COVID-19 module. Studying information from the World Health Organization, the Center for Disease Control of the United States, and the Department of Health of the Philippines, news articles and documentaries on COVID-19, the pastoral team of the Malita Tagakolo Mission or Matamis did its best to understand the new SARS virus and how it infects people and how it spread in different populations. It strived to translate important information into the Tagakolo language and create a module that could help Tagakolo communities face this new disease. In the work of translation, the team did its best to not just write or pronounce some technical terms in Tagakolo way, but to use terms that could best describe what would otherwise be too technical. For example, since COVID-19 is a respiratory disease, the term respiratory system had to be translated. The team translated it as Agyana na Pagginawa, which translates in English to the pathway of breathing. The term respiratory diseases was translated into Magkadal na ang labot sa pagginawa, which roughly means illness that affects breathing. The aim of the whole module was to help the Tagakolo communities cope with the global pandemic. The team's hope was that making the new disease understandable to the Tagakolo people could help transform their fear brought about by the overload of incomprehensible technical jargon into one of better comprehension that could help them protect themselves, their families, and their communities. Community leaders underwent training using the module. These leaders in turn facilitated sessions of debriefing and information dissemination using the module. The same module was used by the IP school teachers for the parents of their learners.
The modular classes of the IP schools. Due to the pandemic, the government had declared that there would be no face-to-face classes this year, and a modular form of teaching would have to be done by schools. This was to prevent the spread of the virus in schools, to protect both children and school personnel. The two IP schools being administered by the mission have almost a total of 200 learners between them. The schools are located in the communities they serve and are far from the mission station. Being in remote locations, it would still have been relatively safe to conduct face-to-face classes in the two IP schools, but we had to comply with the law. The schools have 5 teachers each and is led by the IP schools coordinator. All of them are Taga-Kolo. The teachers of the IP schools began preparing the modules in July of this year until October. They would come to the mission station each week to do this. The medium instruction used in the modules is of course Taga-Kolo, no different from the medium used in face-to-face classes before the pandemic. The shift from teaching orally to writing and the making of modules, which are two very different things, was a great challenge to many of the teachers, and still is. With added costs for the board and lodging of the teachers while working at the mission station, the mission asked the help of the Basic Christian Communities, or GKKs. The communities were extremely generous and sent vegetables, canned goods, instant noodles, as well as cash to help the teachers. The IP schools had nothing, no equipment whatsoever with which to print modules. We also did not have adequate quantities of paper to be able to provide enough modules for the almost 200 learners of the two IP schools. The mission began asking for help from friends and benefactors in June. Our call for help was not in vain, and help came pouring in. When school began in October 26, we had enough modules to provide the parents who fetch them at the schools for their children. Having used Taga-Kolo in our modules, it would be easier for parents to facilitate the learning of their children. Although this is true for many, only a few of the parents have the luxury of sitting down with their children to help them with their modules. A great majority have to work on the land in order to be able to provide for the family. There are also parents who are unable to read or write. To mitigate this problem, teachers take time to hike to the homes of the children to teach, prioritizing those whose parents are unable to help them. For those children whose homes are not too far away from each other, they are clustered into groups, with each group composed of at least 2 to a maximum of 5 learners. There are households that have no chairs, and there are those that have no tables, and children have to find ways to answer their modules. One teacher recounts seeing one of the learners work on his module on top of a sack of corn. The children never fail to express their desire to go back to school and attend classes with their friends and playmates. The teachers do their utmost to make them understand that this is how it shall be for the meantime, that there is still a pandemic. The ritual of Pag-Inalad or Paglimot. The Taga-Kolo have a ritual of protection called Pag-Inalad or Paglimot. This ritual asks Chumanam's blessings to spare the community from harm and protect them in times of pangayaw, which is a process of dispute settlement between families in conflict with the use of force. The ritual's aim is to oppose the other party so as to prevent them from committing violence against the other family. Marites Gonzalo interviewed Baclog Daniol, a respected Taga-Kolo elder and also mentor of the Indigenous Youth Leadership Program of the mission, about the ritual. He explained that if the ritual is performed during this time of pandemic, the community could be protected by preventing the illness from entering the place where the ritual had been performed. Baklug Danyol said that he performed this ritual in the village a week after the national health emergency had been declared by Malacanang in March. The ritual is done by immersing alinti alimot, a closed bracelet or locked bracelet, in water. Then the elder ritualist says a prayer and sprinkles water around the place that needs protection, which could be a household or a village. The ritual action of sprinkling is done 3 times. After the ritual, the elder ritualist informs those in attendance of the palili, or ritual prohibitions. Those who have taken part in the ritual are prohibited for 3 days from consuming poultry eggs and from fetching, asking for, and/or exchanging embers to light a fire from their neighbors. The participants of the ritual are furthermore prohibited from visiting each other for a period of 3 days, very similar to a quarantine. After her interview with Baklug Danyol, a group of women and mothers expressed to her that they felt confident and safe after the ritual. The feeling of security and assurance was truly felt. Baklug Danyol and his brother Baklug Santo narrated that during their adolescence there was an outbreak of cholera in their community. Many of their relatives and friends had died because of that cholera epidemic. At the time, they were told by their ama, father, who was a healer and an anituan, one who is gifted with the guidance of anito, that ritual of pag-inalad o paglimot should be performed when there is an epidemic so that the community could be spared from the dangers brought about by the disease. Baklug Danyol remembered this when he heard on the radio of the declaration of a national health emergency because of COVID-19. The ritual was performed in 3 communities where Indigenous Peoples Sunday was celebrated by the mission.
Indigenous People Sunday celebrations. Matamis celebrates the Indigenous People Sunday on 4 Sundays in 4 Tagakolo communities. GKKs that are not too far from each other are clustered together to take part in these celebrations. Before the pandemic, this was a big celebration of culture, where Tagakolo of all ages took part in the celebration. It was a whole day affair. This year, the mission redesigned the manner of celebration, integrating minimum health protocols in order to protect those taking part in the celebration. In order to avoid the gathering of a big congregation, the mission conducted the celebration in 8 communities. We had asked the participating GKKs to send 5 delegates each to represent their community in the celebration. We were able to celebrate the event where all the communities were represented, but with less people in attendance. All the celebrations only lasted for 4 hours. In some of the communities, the ritual pag-inalad o paglimot was done at the beginning of the affair. In other communities, the ritual dugso was performed to ask Chumanum to protect those in attendance from COVID-19. The participants formed small groups for sharing. The sharing revolved around the Philippine Catholic Church theme of Dialogue of Life, Interreligious Dialogue, Ecumenism, and Indigenous Peoples. The synthesis of the group sharing was followed by the celebration of the Eucharist. At the end of the Mass, the Oratio Imperata, translated in Tagakolo, was also prayed by the gathered community.
These are the things that the mission has been doing in order to help the Tagakolo communities cope with this pandemic.
Thank you, Father Evangelista and Miss Marites Gonzalo. Can we have now our Ooh, where is my slides? Ooh, sorry about that. Uh, oh, here we go. Uh, okay, so we heard Father Evangelista and Miss Martes Gonzalo report on what they have done, the mission have done, and the people themselves. So they were able to explain the module, what COVID-19 is all about, what to do in the language of the people. It's possible because the mission has been there for more than 30 years, in fact, and and the missionaries are able to live with the people, and they also have um, lo- uh, local people to learn from. Uh, the interesting thing about the modular classes of the IP schools is that we're not ready yet. We still have to go to the okay um, the modular classes, and I think this is a pan-Philippine problem. Um, it's good that the mission could help in translating the module and in their own language, in Tagakolo. But you see, the situation of a classroom and a home is so different. Furnitures are very important in literacy. You see, indigenous people's literacy is oral. And here we become literate by being able to read and write. So a table, even without a chair, would be very important to learn. And this is not generally in the houses of the Tagakolo. Now, this is something about very close to the Japanese, the ritual. This is now the cultural response very, very uh, clearly, I think. And I suspect that this came from the people themselves because they definitely know how to respond to this epidemic. It's not only the first time we heard about the cholera epidemic, and probably chickenpox, smallpox, what have you, must have arrived within this century in this village. So for them, like the Japanese, which you will see when you watch uh, not in this program, but when you are interested, that the peace of mind, you know, and having been able to communicate to the spirits who are causing this trouble, really help the people relax, be comfortable in dealing with the pandemic. So they have a way of protecting the village by doing inalat and dugso, and this is what they said, no? And most of all, this is the fourth one would be why the missionaries are there. They're there to spread the word of Christ and tell people what it is to live as a Christian and the values uh, of being a Christian. And in this celebration, you have a combination of uh, religious Christian practices and the people's own, uh, the Kalo's own way of celebrating Thanksgiving, celebrating life. And I think uh, this is, I think, the heritage of missionaries in the Philippines. They're not all bad, but there are good ones too. And through the missionaries, we are able to be educated, of course, in the way of the majority. But in this case, in Father Evangelista's report, we learned that you can hear some voices of the Tagakaulo in the way the mission is being run, and the establishment of the most important institution of the school with indigenous people's cultures with a content. Of course, we cannot have education without cultural content because we will never understand what we are learning about. Okay, now let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the missionary of Jesus responded somehow in the three things of the report. The Tagakaulo had one response, but I'm not saying all throughout that in the 3 points, A, B, and C, Sunday celebration, the modular for education, and the module for COVID, there is no uh, cultural contribution from the Tagakaulo. There are also, because it would not never be understood. But what is very interesting here are the rituals to safeguard the health of the community and the people. And probably they must have really insisted this, and of course supported by the missionaries of Jesus uh, people. Uh, Now, I just want to link this to the cultural responses of the Japanese people. We learned from our studies that if you are able to identify, not not in the sense of the Western science, but if you can give face to the illness, people are able to cope. And the ritual of the Tagakaulo, when they talk about inalad and and the ritual of paglimot, they have an image of that power of the spirits defeating the illness or or the epidemic. In the same way, this is represented in the art history through the study of Buddhist art history in Japan. Now, I am not going to talk about it, but I suggest too that you watch this link, and it would be very interesting to understand the responses of people when you see this presentation. As of now, that's all what I can say, and I would like to thank the people of the Tagakaulo people and Father Evangelista for letting us watch and share the findings of uh, their COVID-19 responses and adaptation to the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Chim, for sharing with us your response to the efforts of the missionaries of Jesus in making COVID-19 understood by the indigenous peoples of the Tagakaulo of Davao. Okay, now we are opening the floor for some questions. It's already 2:30. Maybe we can, if it's okay with everyone, we can extend for about 15 minutes. So in case you have questions, you would like to ask our presenters, you may ask them now. Anyone from our participants in this presentation? Okay, while you are thinking of questions to ask, let me acknowledge the presence of UPCIS Director Sara Raimundo, Jessie Vargas of Ugnayang Agham Pantao, Moe Aray of the International Office of Farish University, Jessie Morales, our visiting student in Farish University. We also have our Japan Studies 100 students, Ms. Yoshiko Hidakawa and Karina Baguio, as well as our C30 student, Mr. Anthony C. I would also like to acknowledge GV Palomeras, Giselle Miole, and Josan Pedro. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. So, do I have any person raising their hands to ask a question?
I think, Ma'am Gina, some questions are put on the chat.
Is it? Sorry.
Yes. Okay. Okay, first. Can I respond? Is
Yes.
that okay? Okay, this is a question from the Jessie.
Okay.
So thank you very much. Would the pride of TITPs improve if the Japanese government recognize them as workers and not as interns? What hinders such classification? Yes. And what do affected Japanese mothers cope with the stress caused by COVID? Are there creative strategies or corrective efforts to improve their well-being amidst the pandemic? Okay, thank you for the question. So first one is, okay. Thank you for your question. So first one, I think time is coming that the government have to accept them as a form. What do you call this? What do you call this? Former workers. No, because officially the Japanese government still doesn't want to accept the unskilled foreign workers from the other country. That's why in reality they need the labor force from the other country, but the tatemae, or for the discourse, the government only wants to accept the skilled workers, not unskilled workers. But of course the line between the skilled and unskilled is very, what do you call this, very vague. Then it's very intentionally. So then if the government accepts them as a formal workers, I think they have more freedom to move, like they have a freedom to change their workplace. So, but as an intern, they cannot change their workplace. So that's violation of the freedom of the workers, I guess. So I hope that the Japanese government recognize them as a former workers, in near future. So then for the stress coping of the Japanese mother under the COVID, I don't have any specific idea about it. Like I was really impressed by the how indigenous people in the Philippines the healing each other through the ritual. So but as far as I know, the the latest updated our way to gather or connect between the people are the online system. So because we are discouraged to see each other face to face, so that's why a lot of people try to make connection through the online system or like this kind of thing, like a Zoom or in a social network. But I guess that this kind of thing is not enough to support the loneliness of or isolation of those mothers. So we really have to think about it. So, but some groups, civil society groups, have a hotline for listening to their programs that they can support by phone. So a kind of home telephone counseling or something like that. So, but those are quite limited, I guess. Then the next one is. Good afternoon. I just want to talk about Japanese COVID-19 response and the prospect of vaccination. Recently, the government has announced legislation towards access for its citizens. How does this affect the marginal individuals population that were discussed? Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. So vaccination is a very hot topic right now. I think last week, the new law was passed regarding the all people can get the vaccination freely here in Japan, but we are not yet sure it's covered all the people living here in Japan, including the migrants or other nationals. But in last spring and summer here in Japan, the Japanese government distributed the cash support to everyone who are registered in Japan, so including the other nationalities people. So I hope the vaccination things will be also applicable to that kind of scheme, regardless of nationality, all of the people can be covered by the vaccination scheme. So, yes, but we are not yet sure. So that's my answer. Okay, thank you.
Another question from Selmion.
Okay. See some, that's a question from the, あれだね。ジョシュ・サンペドロだよね。Okay. Thank you for your
What made the government
so Japan organize studying effects. Okay. Yeah. I think some feminist groups really raise the issue about the labor problem of the women or non-regular workers problem. Then the official statistics clearly say that more damage has happened toward the women. Then there's some groups of female sociologists, who I think she has been a member of some official study group directly under the government or cabinet. So I think she and her group from the Tokyo University, I think University of Tokyo, raised the issues toward to the cabinet and the prime minister, I guess. So that's a kind of initiative from civil society as well as academic, I hope. Yeah. Yeah.
We have a question for Dr. Zayas.
Yeah, I would like to link with what Chio Sensei said about the household or the women, the mother in the household as an isolated being. In comparison with the report I did on the community, you see, it is so different when you have a community working together and a household individually coping with the existence of this virus. See, I think when there are several households talking together, and you somehow help each other, but it seems that isolation is very pronounced. I want to ask Chio Sensei. Chio Sensei, we know that the population of villages has begun more than 10 years ago in Japan. And that you have no longer extended family, you have nuclear families, small families. And many of these men folk go out to work in urban areas. I don't know if you still have, Japan has a very good village community system where they have, we help each other, cooperate with each other. Probably the statistics you may have reflect the urban communities. Does it include the rural communities? So now that's my question to Chio Sensei. That I want to answer the question that was asked to me. Um, uh, can the cultural response of the Tagakolo be a model for government? You see, the Philippines is a heterogeneous community. There are indigenous peoples, there are local peoples, there are peoples in the centers, urban centers, who are indifferent with each other. In other words, there are no village communities in the centers. So when you have barangays being put into lockdown completely, it's just their barangay, and the other barangay doesn't care much, So there is the hand of the government directly on these barangays, but isolated communities, just like the Tagakolo of Davao, they are so distant from the hands of especially the central government. So somehow they are more free. They're more free to decide on how they would go about this problem, this situation that they are in. No, so people far from the centers of power during the time of epidemic may be luckier than those here, especially in Metro Manila, because this is where the government can show that it has power over the people. I hope that answers your question. Oh, can it be a model? Well, as I said, we cannot have a uniform model because we have different responses.
Okay, so can I answer it shortly to the Ma'am Chim's question? So thank you very much for reminding me that the issues, the serious issues of the single mothers are mainly, I guess, urban issues, like you pointed out. So if you are, of course, I cannot generalize, but if you have a family network, so even those you are single mothers, you have family support network, to cope with this kind of problems. But in urban area, the single mothers are really isolated, and especially the migrant single mothers are really isolated. Of course, they have some community network among the Filipinos or Vietnamese. However, it's quite limited. So yeah, so we have, I think it's really the urban issues in a sense. Then in terms of the village community, regarding to the COVID-19, I have a very interesting or some ironic cases that a lot of rural communities are really bonded. Then there, of course, every, the Nenmatsu, the end of year, or Obon in the middle of summer, a lot of people from the city go home to the rural area, right, to see the parents or grandparents. But under the COVID-19, some parents or families in the rural areas deny to, to accept those satogaeri or returning home, the people from the city, because they are afraid. Of course, I'm sure they want to see each other, but those parents or grandparents are really afraid of the reputation in the village community. Oh, those family had their, the son and daughters coming back from the city, and they might have, they might be the carrier of the COVID-19 or something like that because they came from the urban areas or something like that. So it's a kind of the dark side of the village community bonding, I guess. So luckily in my province, Hokkaido, there is no this kind of, the, how do you call it, sticky and strong what do you call it, the a little bit closed community culture. However, we can see a lot of things like that in all over Japan in the remote area. So I just want to add a little bit. Thank you.
I just want to add to what Chelsea said. Majority of population in Japan are in urban centers.
So
yes. I think what she's saying is very reflective of that majority of the population in the urban areas. Yeah.
But of course, we have to accept that the diversity and the differences. Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Sensei.
Okay, it's 2:45 p.m. and we've reached the extension of our session. First, let me thank Chiyo Sensei and of course Kim Sensei for sharing to us their presentation this afternoon to commemorate International Human Rights Day through lectures on COVID-19 and the marginalized peoples in Japan and the indigenous people Taga-Kaolo of Davao. Let me take this opportunity also to thank our university researcher Bianca de la Cruz for help with organizing this webinar, as well as our staff Alexis, Iya, and Melvin, who are with us. Very full first year in CIS, Chiyo Sensei.
Yes, I miss you all.
Okay, so there are some acknowledgement in Nihongo in the chat box, Sensei, for you. They're thanking you for the presentation and for the answer.
Yeah, thank you for your question. And some people even write in chat in Japanese. So, すごいです。ありがとうございます。Especially Giselle かな Giselle? 曲がりかま日本語すごいです。
ありがとうございます。上手です。International Relations from Waseda University.
ganun pala.じゃあ当たり前ですね。
Okay. So Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are still arranging an Ikebana webinar on December 16. This is Ikebana is an offering to the gods, and the Ikebana will be the Ikebana demonstration. There will be a short lecture. And then there will be an Ikebana demonstration as an offering to the victims of the pandemic, as well as the typhoons that happened in the Philippines. So please watch for our announcement in the next few days as soon as we finalize everything. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much. So sorry for being so late.
That's all since we managed to.
ありがとうございました。Thank you very much for.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
お疲れ様でした。ありが
お
とうございます。
疲れ様、ありがとうございました、ジセルさん。先生、本当ごめんなさいよ。びっくりした。
We are flashing the certificates of appreciation to Chiyo Sensei and to Dr. Zayas. They are
すごいわ。かっこいい。
as well
あ
as
りがとうございます。
Professor Zayas. Thank you so much.
ありがとうございます。Thank you so much for. 本当もう入れないと思いました。I don't know what's happened.
So you put this
ねえ、びっくり。初めてですよ。I was quite confident with using Zoom ね。
All our sessions, you're always there. 何かあったのかな。
本当すいません。本当ちょっとテストすればよかったと思ったんですけど、ありがとうございました先生。Thank
you so much, Sensei.
Thank you so much. またじゃあよろしくお願いします。